a true maker, an entrepreneur, and a great friend of mine. Please help me in welcoming Ben Einstein.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. So I'm going to do something a little different and talk about something that I'm actually working on currently instead of something that I've worked on in the past. So this is going to be an interesting ride. I haven't finished everything, so the story's not totally done. So hopefully we'll have some good questions at the end. Now, it turns out that I love to make stuff. That's really my big passion. This would be a photograph of my first romantic encounter as a child. I discovered Legos at a very young age, like many young inventors and entrepreneurs and designers, and it's been love ever since. But I really believe that we're all born with this innate desire to build things and to problem solve and to create. But somewhere along the way, this desire seems to get lost, right? So I often think it really disappears because of education. Education often educates this desire to build things out of us. And this is largely because our education system is built on strictly regimented subjects, right? We really care a lot about data and about standardization and less about engagement, which I think is the #1 metric of how successful education can be. And this is especially true for the STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and math. This is a tragedy of epic proportions. And I'm sure you all know that from taking these before. This is not how you educate students, okay? So despite the fact that our world is becoming increasingly technological, the US education system actually drives students away from many of these new and emerging technological markets. So just as an example, of all the undergraduate students around the world in these various countries, over 30% of Indians are pursuing degrees in science and engineering, and that number is actually on the rise. In China, over 40% of the Chinese are pursuing science and engineering degrees, and that's on the rise. And yet in the United States, we're at a measly 15%, and that's actually falling, right? So this is a big problem because a lot of our jobs are coming from these sectors. And frankly, I don't really blame them. When I think of science and math, this is the first thing that comes to my mind, right? This is what I was taught to remember. We fail to show our students that really this is the purpose of science and math, and of course, things like this. It's not about writing equations on the blackboard. And so our students really lack inspiration to pursue a lot of these new STEM degrees. Now, I think STEM is really important, and all of these engineering and science functions are really critical to our economy, but they're almost meaningless without creativity. Okay, so I don't want to keep raining on this parade, but it turns out we also stink at fostering creativity in education. And to sort of prove that a little bit, I'm going to talk about a couple of studies that have been done to research this. Now, it turns out creativity is actually really hard to measure. If you've ever tried to do it before, it's this very wide open thing. And so scientists have to use different sort of techniques to try to figure out what creativity is. And a big marker is something called divergent thinking. Okay, now divergent thinking is often considered an essential capacity for creativity, and it's a lot easier to measure. So it's loosely defined as the ability to see lots of possible answers for a question, to interpret a question in a bunch of different ways. It's lateral thinking versus linear thinking. A really good sort of standard example of a divergent thinking test. Ask students to list possible uses for a paperclip. Now, you and I and most people would come up with 5 or 10 of these. People that are really good at divergent thinking will generate 200 of these ideas. And they do this by assuming things like, what if the paperclip was 15 feet tall and made out of foam rubber, or something crazy that most people don't happen to realize right away. So these kinds of tests were administered to about 1,500 kids in a longitudinal study that tracks students as they progress through the educational system. I'm going to ask you, what percentage of students do you think scored at this genius level, 3 to 6-year-old kindergarten kids? Take a guess. 100%. Very close, 98%, right? So almost every single kid is very good at this from birth. So they retested the same kids later, the same kids a couple years later. How do you think they did? 32%, right? That's going down. A couple years later, 10%. And by the time these kids were fully grown adults operating in the standard workplace, just 2% of them were considered good divergent thinkers. This is a big problem, right? This is a source of creativity. So this data and a whole bunch of other studies that talk about this kind of stuff point to one astounding conclusion, that we systematically educate creativity out of our kids. A little bit backwards, if you ask me. Now, I had this extraordinary good fortune of going to this crazy school up north a couple miles called Hampshire College. In particular, the Lemelson program, which is this really innovative way that people learn how to make stuff. And so I picked up a lot of these hands-on creative elements sort of natively just by being in this environment. When I graduated, I went straight on to create a product design and development firm called Brainstream Design that I still run today. And just really quickly, I'm going to talk about a couple of products we've developed over the years to give myself a tiny bit of credit so you don't have this crazy guy standing up here mentioning all these things. So this is a speaker system that was designed for Ferrari, and this is designed to go in your home or office. It's a $20,000 stereo speaker system that is designed to look just like their car. So it takes a lot of design cues from exactly how that looks. It's made out of a 4-foot billet of aluminum, so this huge piece of metal that's hogged out on this gigantic CNC machine. And it's painted in the exact same paint that your car comes in. So the idea is you buy a $250,000 car and you say, oh, well, it's in the garage all the time, but I want to showcase that I own one of these things. So you buy this ridiculous speaker and you put it in your room. But as a designer, it's actually a really fun project to work on with more or less no budget at all. This is something we came up with called a segmented chair. So this is a bunch of separate cushion pieces, and they connect with these two little aluminum and bamboo things. It's a little tough to see. So you can rearrange the couch in whatever orientation that you want. It comes in curved and straight segments, and you can make it in a U or an X or whatever suits you for that particular day. But this is really our current pride and joy right now. This is a product called Unity, and it's a universal remote control for your iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, Android, all those smartphones out there. And rather than explain how all this works, this is why we have marketing people. So this is a commercial that has aired in a couple of markets, particularly in Europe and the US, and I'd like to show that to you now.
Introducing Unity Remote, the universal remote by Gear Ford. The Unity Remote device and app lets you control all of your home electronic devices from your iPhone. Simply place the Unity Remote in the room and then use the app to control any device that uses infrared, allowing you to combine all your remotes into one that you can keep in your pocket. You can program macros to power and play multiple devices anywhere in the room at the touch of a button. Everything can be controlled by your iPhone with Unity Remote. TV, satellite box, DVD and Blu-ray players, video game systems, and AV receivers. The Unity app is fully customizable. Add the buttons you use most often and arrange them however you like. Make it your own. Create one remote with all your most used buttons for your favorite devices. Unity Remote by Gear Ford. The only remote you'll need.
And of course, just to pad my bottom line a little bit, it's available at these fine retailers here in the US. And of course, chief among them are Best Buy and the Apple Store, so we're really proud of that. So you'll notice something a little weird about Brainstream, which is that it doesn't focus on one specific sector or market. A lot of companies say, OK, we're going to do consumer electronics, or we're going to do car design, or we're going to do whatever. And the reason that many of these projects remain successful, despite this lack of focus, has to do with the style of learning that's inherent at Hampshire College, and more particularly at this Lemelson Center. And the main thing that's different from the standard style of education is that we traditionally learn things in subjects, right? So you do history and math and science and social studies. I think it's really key that we try as hard as we can to shift away from subject-based learning and into project-based learning, where you have a specific problem or idea that you need to solve, and you have to come up with all the various things that go into that system to make it a sort of valuable solution. Okay, so you're picking up things from fundraising to marketing to engineering to physics to all kinds of things that embody making a product. And so you understand the entire system much better than traditional subject-based education. Now, some of you may know developing ideas into products is extraordinarily expensive. Some of these products I've talked about are hundreds of thousands of dollars to take from an idea and turn them into a product that you can actually buy in the store. In the business I'm in, I unfortunately hear lots of really great ideas that I know will never make it to market because the people pitching those ideas just don't have the capital to make that product real, because it's so cost intensive. So I think what's actually equally important, if not more important, is figuring out how to more cost-effectively capture ideas and turn them into products. This has been my big thing for the last couple of years, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about what we're doing. So I'm proposing a new kind of entity that's built from the ground up to tackle both of these problems, right? So hands-on education and cost-effective product development. And people usually say, how the hell do those two things go together? Well, I'm about to tell you. So to do this, I want to fuse two separate business models. The first is a membership-driven fabrication shop. Okay, so a shop that's open to the public that people pay a monthly fee to access. And the second is a modern incubator, something called an accelerator. That's actually been talked about a couple times here. Techstars is a really good example of an accelerator, but Y Combinator was really the first and is the most famous. And we'll talk more about that in a second. My goal here is to mass produce product-based startups, so companies that build physical things, not one or two of them, a bunch of them all the time. Okay? And we call this company Maker College. Now you can probably tell by now, if I haven't said it enough times, that a common theme here is I want to encourage people to build stuff with their hands. I think computers are really great, and I think that focusing on them is really important. But they're just one tool out of many that we can use to make things. Now, luckily, this mentality is already taking shape all over the world. Has anyone heard of Make Magazine before? Anybody own subscriptions? Cool. So this is one of the coolest publications that I know in existence today. It's this really neat publication put out for sort of do-it-yourself tinkers and hobbyists and all those folks that love to build stuff. And it walks you through a lot of steps in how to get started in making things. And it really is playing a pivotal role in this thing called the maker revolution, where people are making these incredible things in their basements and their garages because the technology to do so has become incredibly cheap. So I have two huge goals with Maker College. The first is to grow and support the maker community, and particularly the maker community in Western Massachusetts. There's a ton of manufacturing in this area, and so there's a lot of people that like to make stuff, and we want to support that as much as we can. Traditionally, there are two things that get in the way of people building things. The first is equipment, and that ranges from hand tools all the way up to big CNC machines and 3D printers and all kinds of expensive tools that have become much cheaper, but not quite cheap enough. The second actually is instruction, and also it's become much easier, especially because of the internet exists. A lot of the know-how is available for free online, but we want to make this instruction available much more accessibly. So I want to take 17,000 square feet of this building, about a block and a half away from here, and fill it with fabrication equipment and open it up to the public. And we're talking about everything from blacksmithing to CNC machining and electronics and sewing and software programming and all kinds of stuff, anything that's required to make stuff. In addition to all the equipment, we want to provide all the classes to learn how to use all of this stuff. Training, safety, and billing are all handled by this modern swipe card system. And each big piece of expensive and dangerous equipment has a swipe card reader on it. And so when we know that you've been trained on that piece of equipment, so you don't have to worry about cutting all your fingers off, or at least you can worry a little bit less about it. Members pay a monthly or an annual fee to access all this stuff. And we're trying to make it as affordable as possible so anyone in the community can come and access all these tools. And when I say anyone, I really do mean anyone, from kids to grandparents and everything in between, and from artists to CNC machinists and everything in between. But we're not just talking about building a great fabrication shop. That's only half the story. We want to use this facility to capture ideas and help bring them to market, unlike anyone has ever done before. And so the second big goal here is to mass produce product startup companies that make physical things. And we do this by stealing an idea from the internet, oddly enough, this thing called an accelerator. And we're going to build this right on top of the shop, both literally and figuratively. The accelerator model was actually started by this guy, a guy named Paul Graham, after he got really frustrated with this one-at-a-time, sort of slow process to start companies. It takes a lot of time, and all these entrepreneurs here know that all too well. So we built this company called Y Combinator that really changed the way internet startup companies get funded and get trained. Two really important pieces of becoming a valuable company. Y Combinator loves to throw around this statistic that the top 2/3 of the companies that run through their program close a $600,000 Series A investment round within 90 days of starting. Right? So I want to step back for a second and sort of talk about what that means. Someone comes here with an idea, and they turn that into a fundable prototype with $600,000 in the bank in 90 days. These are people that have never done this before. So this is a very impressive number. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 success stories here. We're talking about 120 companies a year. So they have a lot of bandwidth, and they're doing really well. So stolen directly from Y Combinator, the process for Maker College begins with this really simple online application that anyone from anywhere in the world can come and fill out. Now, some ideas may even come from the shop right below, but we're not necessarily weighting anything special towards that. We have an experienced team of designers, engineers, investors, manufacturers that are evaluating all these ideas and trying to pick the best 10. And those accepted teams relocate here to live at Maker College, where they have 5 months to turn their idea into a business. But don't worry, we help them out. So we're going to give them some cash. We're going to make a $25,000 Series A investment in them for about 15% equity. We're going to give them some guidance, so we show them how to pitch, we show them how to prototype a product, we give them a crash course in marketing, how to write a business plan, how to file a patent, all really important things for any new product startup. Help them with networking. So we're going to connect them to customers and vendors and lawyers and manufacturers and buyers. And maybe most importantly, they get unlimited free access to all these machines so they can build prototypes of their product. They also have all the help in the world they need to make all this stuff. So over these 5 months, the goal here is to build one killer, polished prototype that they can then pitch to the world. On the last day of the semester, so after these 5 months, all 10 teams stand up and they pitch these ideas to investors and manufacturers and local folks, hopefully some press, with the hopes of getting to the next stage of their business. And that may be licensing the product, it may be selling the intellectual property of that product outright, it may be selling it themselves on the internet, or it may be raising a bunch of capital to start a new startup company. Different exit strategies are going to make sense for different companies. Now, our tagline here is to fund and train 10 new product startup companies twice a year for what it typically costs to invest in 2 or 3 of those companies one at a time. Now, does anyone have any idea what these 6 guys have in common? Besides all being really wealthy and owning companies, and I guess now a lot of them are dead. Too soon? Sorry. Anybody have any idea? White male, okay, yeah, that's also true. Not a single one of them holds a college degree, right? Pretty weird. These are some of the most valuable members of society, and they never graduated from college, right? So this is really our big picture, the Steve Jobses and the Dean Kamens and the Henry Fords of the world. We want to try to find these kinds of people when they're 15 and 20 years old and give them a place where they really can flourish. And we think that place is Maker College. So I'd love to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you. How are we doing on time? Yeah, right there. Oh, we're working on that. Some secret people in the room that we won't talk about. But it's actually been a fairly long road. I've been working on this for about a year now. And it's actually making a transition to a nonprofit based on some of the metrics that go into building a company like this. But if you know anybody, I got a business card, so. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what happens to those people that cannot make a business out of their product in 5 months?
Yeah, well, so there are a lot of products that fit into that category. So things like medical products, they take a very long time to get from an idea into a fully realized product. So the first sort of filter for that is actually trying to not admit companies into this program where it's going to take 10 years to develop a product through the FDA. The second thing that's important is to realize we're not trying to develop a full product. We're trying to come up with a prototype. So the idea is that walking into a room to pitch to a bunch of venture capitalists and say, oh, I got this great idea for this thing, they sort of say, see you later. If you have a thing that you can show and wow people, that makes a completely different discussion after that pitch is over. So the goal, again, is to build a really great prototype. And that's a pretty important part of this whole process, is that we're not trying to get to market within 5 months. That's very, very difficult. It takes a lot of time to develop some of these products. Yeah, in the back there. Sorry, can you speak up a little bit? I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Uh-oh. Sure, talk to me after. That sounds great. Yeah, over there.
Yeah, Ben, 20 years from now, will college education still be relevant? Or is this the beginning of the end?
I think college education is already becoming less relevant. I mean, I can say personally that my education was the best possible thing that could have ever happened to me, but that's because I went to a school that's very different from a traditional school. I think that if you don't know what you want to do at 18 years old, which I don't think is crazy, I think most people fit into that category. I know I was like that. Going to college is a great thing, right? But if you're 17 and you run a business, or you have an idea for something, or you want to paint, or whatever it may be, going to college is not necessarily the gold standard anymore. It used to be, 20 years ago, if you went to school and got a degree, you had a job. That was the way it worked. That's why people went to school. That's not true anymore. You find a lot of graduates now that have a lot of trouble getting jobs right out of school, even though they're immensely qualified to be at these places, just because there's so many people that have college degrees now. So I think it's really important to focus on engagement rather than getting a piece of paper. So if you're really interested and excited to be in college, then go to college. It's great.
I second the charge.
Great. Well, I'm sure I'll talk more about that later. Yeah, Diane.
Excuse me, what's your timetable and who's your support team or advisor?
How much time do you got? I have a bunch of amazing people in this area that have been helping this get off the ground since day one. Timetable, if you asked me a year ago, I'd say today. But that's the way entrepreneurship goes. It always takes longer than you think, and it always costs more than you think, and it always takes more people than you think. If this thing was running in a year, I'd be pumped. I think that would be ideal, but you never know. So as soon as I can. I have another company that I'm running, and that takes 80 hours a week, so it's hard to squeeze all this stuff in there. But us entrepreneurs love to be as busy as possible. Yeah, back in there.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm actually, I was a former high school teacher in America.
Cool.
And currently at Harvard Graduate School of Education, also working at MIT. So one thing we did note with the slide is that we do have majority white males
Sure.
in this space and recognizing this space.
Sure.
But we also know that there's technological divide. We also talk about lack of access to capitals and communities of color. And in about 30 years, this country is going to be mostly people of color.
Absolutely.
So where do you see, or have you had discussions around where do diverse communities, not only people of color, but also women, fit into sort of the dynamic of makers and creators and innovators?
Well, as you may or may not be aware, the majority of college graduates now are women. And the majority of extremely well-qualified college graduates are women. And that's obviously less true with the STEM, with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But I think that also will change. I think a lot of these diversity issues are mostly a matter of time, and it just takes X amount of years for a lot of this stuff to disseminate from the specific people that started it to the general public. I see no particular lack or discrimination in terms of the actual formation of companies that make things. Those 6 people are picked because they happen to run the 6 biggest companies that don't have college graduates, and there are 50 more of them, and some of them are women. So I don't think it's actually a hugely non-overcomable problem. I think it just takes some time, and I would love if you submitted an idea to this thing as soon as it gets running. We'll happily evaluate it. Yeah, right there.
Would applicants without a high school diploma or GED?
Absolutely. You could never step foot in the classroom, and you're welcome here. I don't think that a diploma is a necessarily important thing. I mean, Brendan is a great example of someone that's done amazing things without a college degree, and there are a lot of them, as I talked about. I mean, some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met have never graduated from college. Or high school, sure. Well, I mean, we happen to have graduated from high school, but yeah, sure. It's all the same to me. One more. Yeah, this is the last question, back there.
I love what you're speaking about.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Do you mind speaking up a little bit? I'm having trouble hearing.
Promoter of manufacturing.
Sure.
Steve Jobs, example, cause and effect. What we see on the surface is a beautiful thing, but how it's created is destroying a lot of planet's people.
Sure.
I'm just wondering if maybe you're throwing a little consciousness about cause and effect of manufacturing into your program.
Sure. So.
Very humbling, sweetly too.
So one of the things that I definitely appreciate that comment. One of the things that I think is really important to remember is that manufacturing as a whole is actually not a bad thing. It's just the way that manufacturing is done, right? So there's an amazing book about this called Cradle to Cradle. I don't know if anybody has read it. but it talks about product development not as being how can we be less bad, which is how most companies approach this. They say, all right, well, we generate this many tons of CO2. How do we reduce that to 20% of that? That sounds good, right? Really, the goal is how can we be good? How can our outcomes, our side effects from these processes actually enrich things, not be less bad? Less bad is still bad, right? And that being said, that's a very idealistic thing. It's very hard to make stuff without thinking about that stuff. And it's even harder to make it when you're thinking about that stuff. So there are a whole series of things that play into making stuff more environmentally friendly. And again, I think it's a matter of time. It will take 20 or 30 years before you can buy plastic that's as recyclable as you'd really like to, or actually upcyclable, which is, recyclability is actually a more questionable thing than you would admit. It takes a lot of energy to recycle stuff, and energy is really the name of the game. It's not about materials, it's about energy. So I could talk about this stuff forever, and I won't bore you to tears, but does that sort of answer your question? Yeah. I think a lot of designers that are at least aware of the world are at least thinking about it a little bit, but it's also really important to respect that it's very difficult. Coming up with a product, even getting it to market is very hard, and so having that extra added constraint makes it all the more difficult. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.